did just a small job tonight. I usually try to do at least one little thing on the car every day, just to keep moving. Sometimes it's a lot, sometimes it's just a little tiny bit. Today I was outside water blasting something, and I remembered I had the brake return springs sitting in the molasses tank, and they've actually been sitting in there for a year, maybe more. They were very, very gummed up, very rusty, just really disgustingly gross. You can see here I've got 5 of them. These are the springs that come out of them, and these are still disgusting. I'm not going to reuse these. You can get these new, and it's always a good idea to replace springs like this, because these springs, of course, are 90 years old, and so the springiness goes away over time. They get weaker. So it's worth replacing the springs, but I think most of the rest of it should be reusable once I clean it up. It's disgusting because I think the insides of them look like they were full of grease, which is what this stuff is inside there. It's either grease or just dirt. And they've been sitting in the molasses tank for a very long time, which makes them smell bad. And then I water blasted them to get all the molasses off, so there's water everywhere. And then I had to use the mouse milk to penetrate into them to be able to get everything undone. So the way these work is there are these long screws, and the springs go inside the tube. This long screw goes through the spring, and there's a washer on the end. And then there are these little sort of clevis ends that screw onto the end there. So I soaked all of these to get these threads to come apart, and they all came apart fine. And the clevis end fits into these little plates. So that fits in there. There's a pin that goes through it, and a split pin to hold the little clevis pins in place. And what these are for is, just dry my hands. You can see there's mess everywhere from those things. Getting the springs out of the tubes was actually quite tricky. They were really gummed in there. But the way all this works, this is one of the brake back plates. So these are cast aluminium. This probably looks like a crack down here on the camera, but it's not. It's actually just a casting line. But the way these brakes work is you have a cam inside here which rotates, and that is what pushes the shoes apart. So the shoes obviously go in here, and they pivot at the bottom. The shoes do have springs across them, which is what pulls the brake shoes themselves away from the drums. But these other springs are to retract the cams and the rest of the brake mechanism. So you can see that cam just sort of presses through there, and there's a flat machined on one side. And that flat is to take these little tabs, which go something like that, and the tubes here with the springs in them have these little bolt things that go through them. So these pass through there, and then that threaded part basically goes through that. So that's what holds the end of that spring tube onto the back plate. Ugh, everything's filthy. And the other end, which is attached to the bolt, goes on here. So that fits in there. So you can imagine the spring tube goes between here and here, and all that's doing is retracting these cams. So these are the arms that fit onto there. I'm not entirely certain the orientation of these, and also these little plates are handed. So there's 2 different styles of those. I've got 4 of one type and 1 of the other, so I think I'm missing one of these. But these are you can get these still as well. I don't think the orientation is correct, like I say, but normally what happens is the brake cable comes up and runs over this, and there's a special screw that goes in here that locks it in place. So when you press the brake pedal, that pulls this, and this tab thing, which must go something like that, so the cable pulls it one way against the spring, and the spring is what pulls it back. So there are 4 of these tubes, 1 on each front wheel and 2 at the back. And the reason you need 2 at the back is because with the cable operated brake system, it's a single cable. So if you've got 2 springs on the front, you need 2 at the back to balance it. And these the 2 rear ones basically go here, 2 of them in parallel. So I'm going to go ahead and clean these up and see what I've got that's reusable, and see what it is I'm actually going to have to buy new. So definitely springs. I suspect 1 of these little plates. The rest of it should all be able to be reused once I clean it up. These are the parts after cleaning them up. I just hit them with the wire brush on the drill, and they're okay. There is a bit of wear in them. I think I'll probably end up replacing a lot of this, just because you don't really want wear in all your different brake components and things, but especially these pins. You can see this one's all rusty. This one here as well is all rusty. And I don't think it would be good if you had one of those snap and you suddenly lose the return spring on one of your brake shoes, because that brake is then going to drag. Remember, it's a single cable, loops from the front to the back of the car. So if anything goes wrong on any part of it, it's going to affect the rest of the brakes as well. These little ends should be okay to use, because some of these holes are a little bit worn, but that's okay because they're under tension the whole time. So as long as they're not worn all the way through, they should be fine. Same with these pins. You can see where the tube is actually rubbed into them. This one here is a little bit rusty, and I think I only need 2 of these. I think these only go on the front, so I've got enough of those there. I think at the back it must just be some sort of bolt. I'm not sure. I'll have to look in the parts book. But it looks like I'm definitely going to need to get new springs and new bolts. Possibly these plates as well. I'll have to see. The barrels I've got sitting in degreaser, because the inside of those is just horrible. The outside of them is going to clean up fine. This is the beauty of the molasses, is it just takes all the rust and everything off, and it leaves a sort of black mucky stuff on the surface, but that's actually quite easy to remove. And when you remove it, all the rust is gone. So these were all just sitting outside, I guess, and you can see it's taken the rust off these completely. I've just sprayed them in some CRC, just something to stop them flash rusting. But these will probably get another clean up. I've run out of brake clean and carb clean, but at least they're clean enough now so I can see what I've got. So leave these soaking for a day or 2 and clean out the inside with a bottle brush, and then just wire brush the outside, and those should be fine to reuse. I think I worked out how these front brake springs work. Everything's handed, so the cams are handed, the levers are all handed, these little brackets are all handed, but I believe the way it goes together is like this. The cam goes through the back plate, and this is the little tab with the sort of D-shaped hole in it that fits over the cam, so that when the cam rotates, that moves. This is pinned to that, and normally inside here you've got the spring, so that when this rotates that way, it pulls against the spring and the spring returns it. The lever for the cable fits on like that. It's a tight fit. I don't want to hammer it all the way home. And the brake cable comes in and around a pulley and then up over that, and it gets pinned in through this hole which holds it in place. So when you operate the brake pedal, this moves down sort of like that. So I think its normal position is somewhere there, with that all pinned like that. At the rear, what happens is there's a, if we look over here, there's actually a special bracket that goes on here, and there's a stud that screws into here and the torque tube with a hole in the end, and the two spring tubes will just slide over that stud like that, and then you put a washer over the end and a split pin through the hole to hold it all in place. And the little metal bracket just has ends for these sort of clevis ends, and it just hooks over that little notch there. On the other side here, there's another threaded boss, and on there goes a little metal tab, and there's a spring that goes back from there to here, which is actually the handbrake return spring. So when you operate the handbrake, the rod pulls on this, because you always want rods to operate pulling, because that's where all the strength is. So when you move the handbrake, that moves forwards, and that'll pull on that spring from there to there, so that when you release the handbrake, that's what takes it off. So these, I was looking in the parts books, even things like these brake levers gets a bit confusing, these cam levers. So I've got two different sorts. I believe these are handed, but I don't have a pair. So these ones you can see are curved, and this one is a pair. They seem to be left and right paired with that curve there. The numbers seem to be the same. Seem to be the same on these two though. A2127/8. So I'm not sure if that means that's where the numbering comes into it. According to the parts book, A2128 and A2127 are the right cams for this, for a Mark IV, with these curved cams. But the pictures I've got of a real Brooklands use these straight cams. And I'm not sure if these are handed. They kind of look like they might be. You can see there's a slight offset there. But I think these two will work, because on mine the pulley is in a different place. So normally the brake pulley would go through here. On the Brooklands they had these bigger pulleys which go in there, and I'm wondering if that moves the brake cable over slightly, which is why it uses straight levers rather than the levers that are slightly bent. Again, that'll all become obvious once I've got all the parts and start assembling things, I think. I did look up for these front springs how much it's going to cost just to replace all the replaceable parts. So if I replaced everything, springs, the rods, these little pins, these little brackets and the pins that go through, it works out to be about 100 New Zealand dollars per side. So I may just buy new of everything, and then I know there's no play in it and it's all correct. These I don't think you can get at all. These you'd have to find second hand if I need to get new ones of those. So hopefully I can make these work.